read the articles. And if you notice, the prompt question was, what does it mean to own cybercurrency? And the various readings have to do with ownership, the meaning of ownership, and the problems having to do with property rights. I suggest we move forward from Benny Sassion in order. So, Benny, to you.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I just quickly went through. So, don't have a lot of thoughts, but yeah, yeah. I guess I was just wondering, like, how much of it feels like with more and more, things like MetaMask and basically more and more new features or apps, like the core idea of ownership seems to get abstracted away, or that becomes less of a question with more and more time. So, yeah, I was thinking about that. And the fork part, ETH and ETC, that I did not know that's how that fork happened. So that was interesting to read. And yeah, and I wonder if it's also sort of like sort of a feature of like the early phase of technology. Also, I guess it also reminded me of like the whole ownership thing. Reminded me of there's this book called Boomtown that's about the establishment of Oklahoma City. It's really funny and pretty good, and it talks about how like the ownership for a big part of Oklahoma was decided on a particular day. Like basically everybody would gather at the border of Oklahoma at like 12 p.m. or at noon on a particular day, and there were no ways to keep time, so people just like estimated time and showed up at the border, and then there was some sort of gunshot, and everybody ran into the border and took whatever land that they could get. And so that was how ownership was decided for Oklahoma, which is kind of hilarious, but also I guess that's what happens when you're early to something. Yeah, that's all. I didn't read most of the stuff. I'll read now.
My turn now, I guess. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here, and the big question I was thinking of was what parts of this have analogies in traditional finance and ownership, maybe a little bit distorted, and what parts are genuinely kind of new. And if you actually think, there's actually analogies to a lot of this in traditional finance as well. Like the interesting thing about the flash loan idea is that you're borrowing capital for a very short time to do something with it, right? And the capital can be like financial capital, so you're just borrowing money to buy an asset, or it can be assets itself, as in the apes example. And people do that all the time, right? Like, I mean, renting an Airbnb to stay for a weekend is kind of like timeshare capital, non-financial capital. Whereas taking a financial loan, like a payday loan, until you get your paycheck, that's kind of like a short-term loan for financial assets. So the interesting thing there is it's really pushed to this extreme of like I think one of the articles said 13 seconds. That's what it took. Like they took $1 billion loan for 13 seconds and like executed their big trade. I think something very interesting is going on there. It's almost like, trying to travel at the speed of light or something like, and I'm trying to think in history, has the idea of like the cost of capital or interest ever sped up by an equivalent order of magnitude? And I don't think it has. Like this, like going to 13 seconds. Like today, I think interbank loans or like very short-term loans are at most like a day, maybe. So this is like if you take 13 seconds, that's like a factor of like almost, I think 8600, so about 3 orders of magnitude speed up in capital velocity, so to speak. So that part interested me. Another part that jumped out at me was the debate and disagreement on was this sort of reasonable contract exploit, or was it in some more fundamental sense illegal and considered a crime? And people seem to have some disagreement. And it goes back to the DAO hack. And I'm surprised, Sachin, that you hadn't heard of it before, because that's where even the term DAO comes from. The very first DAO was the hack DAO. But the disagreement is interesting because a lot of the crypto crowd likes to use the phrase code is law. And if you take code is law at face value, you're kind of doing like what I would call procedural literalism. So it's sort of a court with no judge, and no judge and no lawyer. So it's literally just the law defining everything. So code is law kind of has the assumption that the code is complete. So there's no like corner cases that the law doesn't cover. And this is not the case in any legal jurisdiction that I know of. Literally something like the Constitution lays down a core of law. Then there's like a body of case law, and then lawyers argue. If it's within like a straightforward application of the principle, they'll argue based on just the law. And then often there's no sort of discretion for anybody involved. Like, there's like mandatory sentencing guidelines in the US, like certain crimes must have certain sentencings and so forth. But in other cases, there's a huge amount of room, and then the judges, if they're activists, they might like take decisions that really they shouldn't be taking. And in other cases, if they're like constitutional originalists, they'll be a little too much the other way and say that this is a case for the Constitution, and if politicians want it, they must amend the Constitution. So it's like, depending on what you believe, there's like a wide spectrum of positions you can land on about like where the law ends and where discretion comes in. But the interesting thing is that even in traditional law, I think the zone of what you can think of as code is law, the automatic application where the law is unambiguous and you must apply it, I think that's at the center. And then the part where there is room for interpretation is in the periphery. So it's a question of like which comes first and how much of the area does it cover. And I think in traditional law, maybe you could say, maybe Maier has a better idea, but it seems to me that in ambiguous cases, the actual mix of constitutional and case law and precedents will only cover like 20% of the logic of a situation, and the other 80% has to be argued by lawyers and then decided by judges who will make some partial decision based on like where you can reasonably extrapolate and where you have to like defer to politicians. So it's like really complex now. And in code is law, it's more like there's almost a naivety here where people take this sort of like I don't know, they're pretending to be more absolutist than they are because it benefits them. There's probably like a short German word for this or something, but it's like they don't really believe that code is law, but it's convenient to pretend they believe it more than they actually do because it benefits them. So there's a certain naivety going on, but there's also a certain genuine naivety on the part of other people who talk like this, which shows up in sort of I don't know, ignoring the fact that code is incomplete and takes time to evolve and fix bugs and add features and like basically expand. So code is law also expands like case law and precedents. And since we don't have a process for courts doing that, in a way, I think what's happening here is bugs and hacks are kind of the court of like hacker opinion or something. It's literally like, since there's no courts and judges, the only way to make new law is actually to hack contracts, and then in the future people write better contracts. And in the case where it's quote unquote not about contracts, but you have to revert the whole blockchain and fork it, that's kind of like a constitutional not even a constitutional amendment. It's I'm using very U.S. centric terms here. It's the equivalent of a constitutional convention, right? In the U.S., you have to, I think, get 2/3 of the state to ratify a constitutional convention. Then you can go and sort of rewrite the whole constitution in a conference or something. So forks are effectively like that. Okay, yeah. So those are some immediate thoughts, and I didn't come to any clear conclusion of are there clear differences between the new stuff and the old stuff, like qualitative differences. So I'd be interested if anybody can think of any. Passing on to who's next. Anuraj, I think.
Yeah. So when I read the article, basically, what I thought was you're basically trusting the code that it will execute correctly. And Venkat was talking on similar lines. What if the code has lots of bugs? And what also came to my mind was that even if you write the software, let's say correctly, there could be problems in the hardware itself in which the software is executing. For example, if you have heard about the Spectre and Meltdown and Rowhammer kind of hacks, so they are basically exploiting hardware. So you cannot guarantee software is executing correctly, and then something happens. So you can't do much. So code is law is, well, it does not work in the practical sense. You can like aspire to it, so but it does not work in the real world at all. So those were some of the thoughts that came to my mind. And so in my mind, it's basically you are trusting the blockchain itself, that it's whatever you own will remain in your hands. And unless so if you don't have some people involved, or the government or law involved, the real world court system involved, in like today you cannot enforce if you have lost something, unless you like create a hard fork. And well, these days I think like Ethereum is there are so many, it has evolved so much. Hard fork will be really difficult today, as the article says. Passing on to Ben.
Yes. Well, so I have a lot of thoughts and things I could talk about. I don't want to get too carried away. The first thing is this, a pet peeve of mine is when people misunderstand what happened, at the DAO contract. Here, I dropped a little link if you want it. It's a really short summary. Basically, they talk about how you can, rewrite the history of a chain and how that, swaps out blocks. That's not actually what happened with the DAO hard fork. The DAO hard fork was actually really simple. Nothing was reverted. Nothing was rolled back. Instead, it was a single irregular state change, which is, to put it in less technical terms, imagine a ledger of accounts. All the hard fork did is it added a new rule, which is at block, what was it? 1,900,000, a certain block number. A balance from this contract was moved to this contract. Sort of a single global rule is that this block, this particular contract lost funds, and this particular other contract gained funds. Nothing was rolled back or changed like that. Now, of course, what that did is the DAO contract was drained, and all the child DAOs and so on, and was moved into a contract that basically was just a refund contract. So it wasn't like anything was rolled back. It was just sort of like a new rule was added. Right, and now I'm being quite scatterbrained. Another thing that this Every Two article says, and something else that annoyed me, it says something like And I see this stuff happen a lot. If a thief steals something with the code, is it really a theft? And the way you frame it there, it's like, yes, if you already know it's a thief and you already know that it's stealing, then it's not legitimate. That's what those words mean. Here we go. When criminals successfully steal crypto from honest users, who should be recognized as the rightful owner of these assets? The way the question is framed, criminals successfully steal. That means the rightful owner is the honest users. That you've answered your own question. Now, of course, reality can be complicated, and you can have situations where you don't know who the honest users are. But in a lot of cases of theft, that's not the case, where it's actually very obvious what's going on. And like when the DAO hacker made that open letter to the Ethereum community begging to keep the funds, it's sort of almost a joke in that, of course, it's illegitimate. Now, legitimacy is a nebulous thing. You can't always do this. And if you encourage people to try to find the weird nebulous lines between this, they will. But in a lot of cases, it really is cut and dried. And no, this is clearly not what was supposed to happen. Right. Right. There's another set of points I wanted to make. So one of the things about crypto, in real world, possession, I think Venkat has mentioned this before, possession is an important part of the ownership. And on the chain, possession kind of doesn't exist that way. All the power is an action. So say you have some coins. You own coins if you have the power to send coins. You can't just, have them in your house and, stack them up in a corner or whatever. That's not a thing that can happen. Whereas it can happen in real life if you have, real coins. All your ownership ability is tied to various actions you can take. You can send them, maybe you can vote with them, or you can do various things that the owner of the private key is allowed. But you really can't possess them in a way that you can just enjoy their physicality in real life. And another thing related to this, and I tried looking for this article earlier today and I couldn't find it. I'm pretty sure that there was an article by David Graeber where he mentions almost offhand that he had tried to run a commune or something, and they needed a car and they could pool money, but they couldn't. A group of unincorporated people can't own a car in the United States because the legal system is just completely not set up to handle it. Someone would have to take ownership. Someone's name would have to be on the deed or whatever. And how he remarked that it was completely impossible for a group of people to own a car without having to set up some kind of legal structure like an LLC or a partnership or whatever. Obviously, you can have a group of friends who possess a car and who can, if someone needs it, they can use it, and they can be, their own internal group politics for executing that. But in the sort of U.S. legal system, there's no way to and actually encode that legally. And that made me think about how DAOs and so on now. For physical objects like cars, you're going to run into problems where because the car exists, say, in the United States, that's going to cause problems. But if you imagine more virtual items, you really could have a group of people. And right now, DAOs are all about voting. And, so you vote for whatever, like Constitution DAO, voting, that sort of thing. But I think the actual design space is a lot bigger. Instead of voting, if you imagine, go back to the car analogy, the idea of a group owning a car is if anyone needs a car, they can use it. So imagine a token that a group owns or is owned by a DAO, and the token, anyone who needs that token, maybe it's I'm imagining a card for swiping into a building. Anyone who's part of the DAO can swipe into that building using this token. And it sort of is completely shared because what it does is it provides access, and anyone in the DAO can provide access to anyone. Anyway, I think I've rambled on enough, and I'll let some other people talk. Who's next?
Hey, that's me. Thanks, Ben.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of what's been said has been really interesting. First off, I think the thing that I still try to keep this short because I don't know exactly how to articulate it well yet. I think one of the things that's sort of interesting in the context of ownership is the concept of stewardship. So the stewardship is like a kind of a concept that is pretty well defined already in things like asset management, where the asset managers kind of have ownership on behalf of the real owners of some asset or commodity, and that that kind of ownership by proxy accords them a kind of the ability to execute votes within meetings, and to have influence on the economy. And this is kind of like an ownership without ownership. The and I'm just, I guess I'm sort of curious to see how that gets abstracted out more and more, with the kind of I mean, I was like, there's Evan from Disco. I can't remember Evan's last name. Talks about this in the context of identity and NFTs, and sort of the kind of ongoing question between whether or not a kind of decentralized identifier and verified credential framework, or an NFT or a non-transferable NFT, like a soul-bound NFT, are which of those are preferable models for conferring identity in a decentralized web context. And one of the kind of arguments that Aaron makes against non-transferable NFTs as a form of identifier for a person's identity is that one, it is like publicly visible on the blockchain, and also with something like a non-transferable NFT, it's hard to do like key swapping and kind of security management with your wallet. Like you're kind of stuck, and you can also be like just spammed or airdropped some identifier that you don't want to have identified with you, and then you can't get rid of it. At least that's just like my technical understanding, that you can't get rid of it. And so there's that, but then there's also like the one kind of like solution that's proposed for the kind of privacy concerns is to create zero knowledge proofs of these non-transferable NFTs. And while that solves the problem of being able to say to another person, like, this attribute of my token confers or attests to some part of my identity, without you needing to see the whole thing. It also opens up the kind of market space of transferring an NFT to someone else. So you can send someone like a 0K knowledge proof of your NFT. So like, I think like a common example would be, since it was brought up in the paper that we read, like if you had an ape and then you wanted to give someone the ability to use that token, that NFT without having to actually own it. You can make a zero knowledge proof of that, transfer then the zero knowledge proof. You still hold the ownership of that token, but you're basically allowing someone else to become a steward or an owner without ownership of that token, and they can then use that to obtain the same kind of ownership rights that they would have if they did actually have that token in their wallet by using a zero knowledge proof. This is my understanding. I might be getting some of the technical details wrong here, but in general, I think like that is a kind of interesting design space to think through of like what it means to be able to kind of like give someone temporary ownership over something. I mean, I've thought about this a little bit in like the context of like Web3, paywall blockers. I'm really curious to see like if someone comes up with like a way of like circumventing token gated content and this kind of like transferal of like zero knowledge proofs of like a underlying asset without needing to actually own it could be a way of like collectively opening up access to something without people having to actually like own the thing that confers the right to access that material. So that's sort of the like and there's also like interesting space to think about in terms of like meta governance and like protocols that allow people to exert influence over governance decisions by loaning out governance tokens. And that's like a whole other space that I'm not as well versed in. But I think like in respect to like the design space of governance, like it's a similar kind of question of like what is like the like what kind of like this ownership without owning something, this stewardship model. Like I'm just interested in how that kind of like generally abstracts out the concepts of ownership and governance and the kind of rights and affordances that we're ascribing to these digital assets. And with that, I'll pass to Grigori.
The simplest thing that comes to mind when I think about ownership is a little bit paradoxical cost-benefit analysis. When you own something like a Mona Lisa, you definitely have to bear some costs. For example, you have to make sure that you have genuine Mona Lisa, and you have to protect it, and you have to secure it somehow. So there are some costs on an ongoing basis. What are the benefits of all this? This question is much more complex, I would say, because if all you have is just one Mona Lisa and you keep it, I don't know, in your house, the benefits are not obvious. So to get to realize the benefits, you have to show it somehow. And you have to make sure that people appreciate seeing Mona Lisa. And it gets even more complicated because there are certain patterns of people going to museums and enjoying certain things. And probably even if they had enjoyed Mona Lisa 10 years ago, they're not going to enjoy it as much 10 years from now. So basically, ownership is about costs and a little bit of a hustle to make sure that your ends meet. And on that, I will pass it on to Jenna.
Thanks, Rory. Yeah, there's tons here. I have fun trying to even follow a lot of what people are talking about. But so I'll be quick. my notes include this, most of what we've talked about today are asset attacks, but the governance attacks are either real similar or will end up needing quite different thinking and tools. So stealing my vote versus stealing my NFT kinds of stuff. I've been, another point is I've been seeing a lot of popping up, I think the Gnosis guys, asset monitoring tools. You know, for years, a bunch of us have used website monitoring tools that keep track of whether your website's up in different ways. So this is a whole space of having something that is somehow pinging your assets, your votes, and your NFTs and whatever on a regular basis. Commits, I really liked your point about stewardship. And so you own it, but only in the sense of what I've heard called the duty of care, that you have to make sure that the thing doesn't get broken, which goes to Grigori's point. That was also really important. The cost of ownership. A long-term game I've played is who owns whom. If you own something, it actually owns you, and has set up a bunch of obligations on you. And so it's been a long-term game of trying to only own the things that are worth that. For me, I had a note, everybody's mentioned this, but the general point of zero-day exploits are just scary in a whole new way in this space because of that idea of on-chain irrevocability. I think that's close. And then a more general sort of final point is risk. One of the writers that from Today Maier was talking about nobody wants to publish their risk analysis. And I think that's really important. So can we even come up with some sort of a risk score, for example, and that any particular piece would have a published, you know, that you never know the unknown unknowns, but the known unknowns might be knowable. And then this time horizon, since this is still such early days, part of why I appreciate this group to just have at least vaguely be trying to keep an eye on what's going on. It's been really helpful. And that can we solve things now enough now to keep terrible things from happening so that the ecosystem can survive, and that, you know, maybe 10 years from now, most of this will be solved, but we will have created new problems, or the whole thing will blow up somehow. You know, the unhealthy speculative parts of crypto really are problematic. And how do we reel that back in? I remember right around 2008, just before the banking blow up, the financial meltdown, reading things about, you know, when your cab driver is giving you their property purchase strategies, because everybody was buying and flipping properties, that's how you know the whole thing is about to crash. We've kind of started from that here, and I'm curious to see where it goes. So that's my quick notes, hopefully quick enough. Maier, passing back to you.
Thank you. Just a second. I noticed that nobody related to my quotes from Noble House, and that is actually what started me on this journey. And the reason is because what I liked about the book is that the tai-pan, even though he controls a big part of the economy in Hong Kong, when he suddenly needs a loan, he doesn't have any property to guarantee it. And I really liked what Ben said, that possession in crypto is about action. So if I take what Jenna said about asset management, what I want to know is not where my asset is, but what has it been doing? So it's a whole different kind of world, and maybe we're making a mistake looking at crypto as assets, but instead we should be looking at it as an ability to be leveraged. So let's say I had 5 Bored Apes or $1 billion in crypto, and somebody else, at no cost to me, leveraged them to get an airdrop get a loan, take over a DAO, did he do anything wrong? Should I be keeping track of it? How would I know about it? It looks like the value of the crypto that I have is not in the crypto itself, but in knowing how to take advantage of it. So if you think about today, you give your money to the bank gives you interest, and people in the bank know how to take advantage of financial opportunities to make the money do work. But in crypto, we didn't put it in a bank. We think we're keeping it in our pocket. So I find this aspect of crypto very interesting, and that's why I put in the question of, do you own your friends? Because maybe crypto is less like an asset and more like a friend that you can ask to do something. And maybe you will, and maybe you won't. But it doesn't belong to you. The government can't take away a crypto because it's not yours. You happen to know of that secret place in the forest where if anybody else knew, they could also go there, and there's a pool of water and it's sparkling, and there's berry bushes with raspberries on them. It doesn't belong to you, but if you're the only one who knows about it, it's yours. So it seems like a lot of crypto is about leveraging knowledge, and the fact that it's all out there on the blockchain is, how should I call it? A curtain. It's not true. It's not out there on the blockchain. If you don't know where to look, you won't see it. So that is my feeling about ownership of crypto, and it probably means that the real game is not what coin do you have and when did you get it, but more what do you know how to do with that coin. And if you don't know what to do, you don't really own it. So that's my take on it, and I'd be happy to see if anybody has second comments after the first round.
Short second comment based on what you just said. The idea of like, do you own your friends? Reminds me of this example. I think it was in Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene or one of those biology evolution books. But social animals which feed together on food that basically decays or rots often have sharing behaviors. And I forget if it was in the book or in a discussion, a friend interpreted it this way. But that's a way of thinking of your friend's stomach as a way to bank assets that are in surplus for you. So, for example, if your bats are the example in the Dawkins book, you go find a bunch of fruit and there's way too much fruit and you can't eat it all. You might bring back some and share with your friend, and they can eat it. And next time they find some fruit, they can bring back some for you. So in a sense, you have like found more fruit than you can consume right now. So you've banked it in your friend's stomach, and you're using like a game theoretic prisoner's dilemma or tit for tat type protocol to access that saved capital. So that's one way to think of like friends as kind of a banking system, and blockchains are kind of like that because yes, there's like a technical computational consensus thing involved, but there's also like softer stuff like we're talking about like dropping things into people's wallets and so forth, or like explicitly borrowing things and things like that. So there's like a whole kind of friendship protocol involved. Plus, also everything has value only because everybody agrees it has value. So there's like a baseline of like aligned community or consensus about value. So, for example, if there's like a small growing blockchain with only 100 people, and 99 of them at some point decide it's a stupid blockchain and go away, and only 1% is a person is left, is there really anything of value? And arguably no, because it doesn't, unless there's some technical way it links to ownership of like physical assets. It's all like social reality, and it goes away if people stop believing it. So that's actually an interesting definition to apply. So the Philip K. Dick definition of reality is that which doesn't go away when you stop believing in it. Well, blockchain, I think, is mostly unreal by that definition. But in some cases where the keys point to things that unlock physical assets, then yeah, there's like Philip K. Dick style actual reality there.
Any other comments, notes? Um,
If so, I remember someone was talking about how in ETH, especially, you can be given things without your permission. And I guess I've been holding a small conversation on that in the voice meta. But basically, remember, tokens on ETH are all like built on contracts. The ETH base layer doesn't know anything about them. So, and what happens is you have these contracts, and the contracts effectively have a list of wallets and balances. And you can say, if you have ownership or control over some token, you can use that to give it to a different address. And the block explorers or Etherscan or whatever will see that and say, this is a standard, this is a token. That means this new address owns this token. When the new address sort of didn't do anything, I don't know of any other existing standards, but I would very much like it if what you could do is you could offer tokens to someone, and then that address would have to take some action to accept. That I think would be an actual way a better way to do it. I'm not sure how relevant this is, but since I am in the business of building stuff like this, and the way I would do it is you could offer stuff to someone, and then they would have a choice to either accept or deny, or they could just leave it hanging forever, and then they would never actually take ownership of it. But all this stems from the fact that there is no real ownership or real possession in crypto. It's all about who is allowed to do what with what. So people can, quote, give you something without having to actually, give you anything, but simply give you the power to do something with that. Or maybe even not. I mean, I think, and this is where I knowledge of Ethereum is limited. I think it's possible to create token contracts on Ethereum that don't actually let you spend things, but what might show up on Etherscan as you owning something. Basically, we would be able to trick Etherscan and other wallets that say, hey, you own this token, but you don't actually have any power over it. But yeah, anyway, I guess that's a little tangent. It's pretty much the end of time. So, does anyone say anything else?
Sorry, what was that last point that you were making? Everything else made sense, but the part about having something on Etherscan that says you own it but not being able to do anything with it.
I don't know if this is on that this is where I'm outside of my technical depth on what you can do exactly on ETH. But I know there have been tokens created where you think you have them, but if you try to trade them on Uniswap, and these are scam tokens, you can buy them, but you can't sell them because remember these tokens are all generated by standard ERC20 or ERC whatever contracts, but you can modify the contracts. And if Etherscan recognizes it, this has all the functions of ERC20, but maybe it also has additional functions, or you hide it somewhere. I don't actually code ETH, so I don't know. You could end up with a situation where Etherscan thinks you have a token, or it looks like you can trade the token, but if you try, the transaction fails because it's actually calling some other function that's slightly different than the standard ERC20. All this digs down to the fact that tokens are not tokens are not first-class abstractions on Ethereum. The base layer doesn't know anything about them. They're all standards that were built on sort of these arbitrary smart contracting systems. So there's lots of little details that can cause all sorts of wackiness. I don't know. If it was up to me, I would have made it so that tokens like this, I think they should be first-class citizens. The protocol, the base layer should know about them, and there should be one style of token instead of the ability to make a million different, very slightly different styles, which can have extremely unexpected results. But anyway, that is.
Okay, we're just about at the hour, so if nobody has anything else to say, I'll just say thank you.